In this episode, we talk to Rupert Taylor about the next generation of PMO swimming against the tide. Rupert has over 35 years immersed in the leadership of change programs and portfolios. Rupert founded Kivue, I'll get that right one day, Kivue Limited in 2013, responding to the need for a simple-to-use, outcome-focused PPM tool for optimizing portfolios. Rupert specialises in working with executive teams to support more effective, collective, and individual leaderships of transformation projects, programs, and portfolios in his mantra, and he is to keep it simple in order to increase chances of success.
Rupert lives in Oxford with his wife Susie, has 3 grown-up, sometimes, children, and his a bit different fact is that he took 2 years off in 2003, bought an olive farm, and lived up a mountain in Andalusia in Spain with his family having an adventure with olives. That was certainly something he didn't bring up during
He didn't
the
bring that up,
podcast.
no. Cheeky
No, he
bugger.
didn't. Well, but he brought plenty of other things up, and we love kicking the tires with Rupert on PMO and being pragmatic, throwing out the book or not necessarily throwing out the book, but not necessarily having to follow the book all the time. I love the way he held sponsors to account as well. So listen to that one, folks. But what were some of the things that stuck out for you?
That was great. I think he understood, what it takes to set up a PMO and the fact that we kind of went down some rabbit holes with how to structure organizational design, being brave and speaking up. I mean, the value of a PMO as well, organized, and then keeping the end in mind around outcomes and how we prepare for that in projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the outcomes and the end, near the end, he gives his prediction for the Ashes cricket between Australia and England. So listen
He's
out for
very
that
biased. He's very biased.
one. He is. But
Very
we'll
good.
leave it there for you. We won't spoil it all. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
We understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And whilst we don't have Martin, we do have Dale in a very flowery, beautiful, colourful shirt there. Dale, tell us why.
The shirt? Are you jealous?
No.
I think we should get Project Chatter shirts in these colorful ones.
Oh, now we're talking.
Yeah.
If it wasn't winter
Because
in
it's-
Australia, I'd agree with you.
Exactly. It's because it's summer here.
Yeah.
That's why.
That's why I'm jealous, mate. That's why I'm jealous. It's good to see
How
that,
are
mate.
you? How are you? Yeah, how are you doing?
Very good, very good. Let's introduce our guest. Why not? Mr. Rupert Taylor, how are you, sir?
I'm extremely well, thank you very much, and I am very envious, Dale, of your summery shirt. I've got a very dull sort of city shirt on. I feel completely dull next to you.
Well, we're all mixed because it's bloody freezing in Melbourne at the moment. If anyone's in Australia, and I'm wearing the original. I don't know if you can see this, Rupert, but I'm wearing the original hoodie that we got for Project Chatter, which is probably about the same time we started talking about having you on the show. Remember, was it during COVID?
During COVID.
It was
a
I'm
long
loving
time
the
ago.
hoodie. It's great.
It was the raw one, and we had a few others. So we have to get Rupert a hoodie. I think Dale will have to do something there. But Rupert, we had a great little chat before we pressed the button, and I love the title of this and having a bit of a go at PMO because I think we've had a few guests on, haven't we, Dale, about PMO, but we've really not dived into other ways of doing it. And I think this is going to be a really good conversation. So before we get in there, Rupert, I think as well we owe the audience, whilst we might know you for a little bit of time, we owe the audience a bit of an origin story about where you got into PMO and how it kind of all started for you.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because I absolutely love PMO, and I fell into it. I did not. It certainly wasn't by design. It was. It just happened, and it actually happened because I spent 6 years. I was taken on by a company that was in the telecoms industry in the late 1980s. And we built the business over a sort of 6-year period and sold it. And I was lucky enough to have a few shares, and so it was one of those periods in business, particularly in the telecoms industry, which was just extraordinary. And I'd not been I shouldn't think I'd left more than a week, maybe 2 weeks after we'd sold the business. And my ex-chief executive rang me and he said, look, why don't you come out to Madrid? We're launching a new telco business in Madrid. I'd love you to come and help us launch the B2B part of the business. So I said, well, that's fine, but I've got children at school. And much as I love Madrid, I don't want to move to Madrid. And he said, well, come out as a contractor. Just do it I'd never even thought about contracting. So I said, okay. We then talked about sort of a rate of pay and agreed on that. And out I went. And I did a year and a half in Madrid. I moved to Paris to launch another telecoms business which was another year, 12 to 18 months, 12, a bit less than that, 12 to 14, 15 months. And then I was asked to go to Germany to launch a third telecoms business,
Wow.
which I was also in for nearly two years. And I suddenly sort of looked back and I thought, hang on, I've done 6 years of launching telecoms businesses. What have I really been doing? And what I'd really been doing was running significant programs. And I'd never really thought of it that way before because I'd never been on a Prince 2 course. I'd never been down the traditional program or project route. I had just done it via experience and via being selected. I have to say, first time I was selected in the UK to run a major telco program, I thought, what on earth are they doing? I'm nowhere near qualified to do this. I just sort of literally followed my nose and did what I thought was right. So after 6 years of doing it and being told that we'd done it very well, and I sort of thought, well, actually, I want to build a business on this. I want to build a business which is not really sort of based on the textbook and the traditional way of doing things, but is built on experience and practical and pragmatic approaches. And that's really when I started to build a transformation and change business. And I suppose that was the first time I started to associate with terms like PMO and Steerco and program charters and etc. So, and I've been working in it ever since, which is now 30 years. 30 years!
Wow.
Whoa!
Yeah.
And I still haven't done a Prince 2 course. And actually, I won't do a Prince 2 course. And I've got nothing against Prince 2, P3O, any of the methodologies that are out there. It's just I don't want to lose that. I don't want to in any way, shape or form compromise that pragmatic approach. I don't want to do it. That's what my business is about. And I feel I need to stay honest to my business. And if people don't want that, I completely respect it. That's fine. But that's how I fell into the world of PMOs.
That's fantastic. And interesting as well that you've gone the experiential route, because a lot of people do, whether they're ushered in by the companies that they work for, or they're told that, in order to get the next kind of career break, you need to have a certain level of PMO/PMP type qualifications or accreditations. But you're proving us today that we don't need one and we can do it on our own. So what is it that makes it a passionate 30-year commitment? What gets you up in the morning and says, I'm going to just crack on with this PMO stuff?
I think what fires me up is how people work. It's not how we're going to work people. It's how people operate. It's what their characteristics are. What really fires me up is when we go into a program, either to recover a program that's going wrong and therefore needs to be rescued, or into a greenfield program and looking at the stakeholder group and thinking there is such a diverse, complex, political, conflict-oriented environment there that's the maze that I've got to somehow work through with my team. And that's absolutely 100% what gets me up in the morning, because I love that. I just love that challenge of how you bring people on a journey, to coin a rather corny expression, but how you bring people on a journey as a group, as opposed to just focusing on the deliverables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the melting pot of projects, and definitely because as we've seen that the projects or programs as such are getting bigger, more complex because of the nature of human behavior, and it becomes a bit of a stifle if you don't know where to go. And we've seen a lot of projects suffer from not necessarily just understanding how people operate, but how to lead people through those difficult stages. So is it a natural gift, or you taught yourself? How did you get into the place of organizing or supporting people?
I think it's an interesting question. I'm working with a couple of Russell Group universities at the moment, and the thing that's fascinated me there is how you get a bridge working between the academic leaders of the university and the professional services leaders of the university, because culturally they are completely opposite. And so, someone said to me the other day, how did you get into this? How did you sort of engage with that sort of scenario? And I think, look, if I'm honest, Val, what I feel, and I don't want to in any way. I mean, I think anyone that goes into the world of PMOs, number one, deserves a medal for what we have to go through sometimes in PMOs, because it's tough, really tough, and we all often don't get a lot of thanks or gratitude for it. But I think. For me, we often as a profession, and I include myself in that profession, don't help ourselves because we talk a certain language which is a bit alien to many of the people that we're engaging with. So when I remember very early on when I started launching those telecoms companies, hearing people talking about sort of steering group meetings and program charters and PIDs and agile versus waterfall methodology, etc., and thinking, whoa, what does all of this mean? What does it really mean? And what does it mean to someone who's not from a project background? And if I look at the program or the programs that we're running, probably 95% of the people that are involved in the program are not from a project or program background. So why are we speaking this alien language? Let's just simplify what we're doing, simplify the language, focus on the outcomes that need to be achieved from a PMO, and gear all of our energy behind delivering against those outcomes. And let's not get overly evangelical about either the methodology or some of the language or the latest raid that we've come across that we think is particularly brilliant for risks and issues. It may be, but if you can't engage with the community that's the recipients or the audience of that sort of information, you're never going to, you're always going to struggle to make progress. So it's a very long-winded answer to a very short question, but that's how I feel. I feel we sometimes don't do ourselves any favors as a profession, and we overemphasize some of the projecty, programmy terminology, methodology, etc. When actually, if we simplify things, it's pretty. There's a lot to be said for keeping things as simple as possible.
Yeah, we had this rule. I think we called it outsmarting ourselves, because obviously there's a lot of bright people that end up in PMO and they go down the route of using uncommon language, and unfortunately for us, that's a detriment. And then the discussion becomes almost an existential threat before the PMO function itself is, do we need one? And we get a lot of questions about why PMOs have any value at all when we don't do any of the so-called real work, which is always an interesting conversation. But the barriers of entry for PMO is obviously changing. I think in Australia, I can speak for a lot of companies in Australia that PMOs are kind of expanding across various sectors now. There is a need to kind of bring people together, and I feel like the PMO is the great internal institute to do that. But what do you say to people who say that that perhaps PMO is a bit of a nice to have rather than a need to have?
I say if the PMO is operating properly as it should do, and the PMO is essentially focusing on what value looks like from the PMO, then there is no question. There is absolutely no question of the value of a PMO. We are slightly, I think partly because as a profession we don't always help ourselves with the language, etc. We're slightly up against it when we go into program situations often, because the sort of brand PMO is not always that good. It doesn't always have that many positive connotations. If you go up to many people, we do PMO assessments where we assess how effective PMOs are actually operating within their environment. And if you talk to the stakeholder group, who are the sponsors, the business owners, etc., of key programs, I would say probably 6 out of 10, if I'm being generous, times they will say, look, they're administrative, they're bureaucratic, they're a bit over processed, there's lots of forms, they might make life a bit slower. And that may not be true. It may be absolutely unfair, but it's a perception. And actually, perceptions with your customer group is everything. So, often one of the things I go in and I talk to our customers about is essentially being really clear about what your brand means, your PMO brand within your organization, and don't let it mean agile versus waterfall versus, make it focus on delivering successful outcomes, accelerating delivery, making delivery more predictable for the organization, for the CFO, for the etc., aligning with and ensuring that we achieve the corporate objectives, because all the projects we're doing are the projects that we need to be doing to achieve those corporate objectives. And the PMO have helped us go through the process of prioritizing the right projects to do and not allowing the pet projects or the person who shouts loudest. And that's not always easy. But I think you have to really start, if you're running a successful PMO, by getting your brand in the right place and the values that sit underneath that brand. And that might take a little bit of selling, going out and actually telling the business what your PMO is all about, rather than assuming that everyone thinks they know what a PMO is all about.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a pitch, I think, to be made to try and bring people on side.
I absolutely agree, especially if they're, if you are being transactional in the PMO, and it's you create a bit of an us and them legacy in that dynamic, because obviously you are, as part of the PMO, you are integrated, and so you have full visibility. But I think one of the conclusions I've seen is that the perception of PMO is, because you see everything, you assume everyone else sees the same, and they don't, because they are, specialists in various fields, and we've kind of got a vantage point, which makes us very useful for the business. But sometimes we forget about bringing up the people as well and making sure that we're integrated in those business teams and project teams.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I say to a lot of the PMOs that I work with is, I say, look, I have a business which is an independent supplier of PMO solutions. We have to win contracts that essentially enable us to then go and run a PMO for one of our clients. That contract typically might be a long-term contract, because the PMO is a 2 to 3 year or 4 year. The program is a 2 to 3 year program or whatever. But I very rarely get a contract of more than 6 months or maybe a year in order to go in and run that PMO. So every 6 months to a year, I've got to go back to my client and justify why they're going to spend another X amount of thousands of pounds on my solution. And I think if internal PMOs imagine that they had to every 6 months go and win the contract for the next 6 months, they'd think more carefully about what value means to their client and what sort of things they can do to really add value to the client. And when I put the title of this podcast being Swimming Against the Tide, it's not allowing yourself to get complacent with what PMOs are, because that's what's in the textbook, and thinking it doesn't matter what's in the textbook. If I'm going to win the next 6-month contract, I've got to prove my worth. I've got to make sure that we're adding value. And I need my client to have a perception of value from the PMO as well.
I find it fascinating listening to you and Val just go back and forth there, Rupert, on PMOs and just the simplification of PMO, Project Management Office, and
Yeah.
as you're saying, throw out the textbook definition. What is your definition of a PMO? Because we've discussed this before, and we've come to the conclusion that PMOs come in different shapes and sizes and mean different things to different organizations, dependent on what their role is in that specific organization. Do you have a definition, or do you not put it in the box?
I don't. We've sort of branded the PMO in different. We'll work with our clients to brand the PMO with slightly different brands. We had one that was called the DASH, the Delivery Acceleration Service Hub, but all about focused on delivery and speed. But generally we have PMOs, EPMOs, CPMOs, like most organizations do. And as you quite rightly say, it slightly depends whether the PMO is relating to a specific program or whether it's a portfolio level PMO and even if it's a portfolio level PMO, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a CPMO or an enterprise-wide PMO. So there are various different flavors, but for me, the actual term itself is fine. PMO is just a term, and it's a good term, Project Management Office. And I'm very comfortable with PMO. It's more how you live the values underneath and around that brand to make that brand really mean the right things in the organization that you're working for and providing that service to. And I think that to me is more crucial. And that's what I think is different, because there aren't that many organizations that I go into where the PMO has really thought that stuff through. And it's not something you do and then it just happens. You need to live it. So, the head of the PMO should be looking in the mirror at least once a week and saying, what have I done this week to make a difference? And how am I, how can I make next week make a difference to the organization, not to the head of transformation or to the whole organization.
No, absolutely. And if I can ask you one more before we jump back, because I want to pick apart pragmatism and what that actually means. But before I go there, do you think in general, not just within PMOs, but on projects, that we've almost gone too far in breaking down elements of project delivery to simplify them so much that it actually created more complexity? So we've got cost managers and risk managers and project planners and project managers and commercial managers and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And yet we forgot that actually it's a single project, a single entity that needs to deliver a common output. I feel like we've gone too far.
I absolutely agree. I think we have all these roles now that sit around a project or a program or a portfolio, and it's almost as though you have to recruit those roles to justify being a PMO, as opposed to what do we have to do to deliver this program, and who do we need to do it. So something I feel very strongly and passionately about is that projects and programs don't get delivered based on project plans or methodology. Methodology is important. There is no question about it. I have a software business and we use Agile as our methodology because it suits software really well. And and nearly all of the programs that we deliver are very much delivered in a fairly traditional waterfall environment. So it's not that methodology is not important. It is important, but it doesn't deliver programs. And the two ingredients that I feel are completely critical to have in place when you're delivering a transformation program are confidence and momentum. So it's nothing really to do with plans, or it is to some extent, because a plan can give you confidence, but actually that's what you're striving to get. And when I go into recover a program that's gone wrong because a client asks us to come in, there's two things I do. The first thing I do, it tends to be the person who's got the headlights on them, who's ringing me up and saying, can you come in and help us? So it's the person who's the sponsor, who spent 5 million quid on the program to date and it's delivered nothing. And the headlights are right beaming, slap bang down on them. And so they are nervous and concerned about what happens next. First thing I say to them is, I'm going to be honest, if you're part of the problem, I need to know that you're going to listen to me. So if we come in and we do a discovery piece on your program and you are part of the problem as the sponsor of the program, there is no point me spending your money unless you're going to be happy for me to tell you.
What response do you get when you say that?
I always get the same response. It's fascinating, Dale. I was terrified the first time I did it, which was about 10 years ago. I thought, Jesus, what's this person going to say? But I always get the same response. It's really weird, which is they put their hands up and they say, look, if I'm doing something wrong, tell me. No one else is telling me. And the moment they do that, I know I'm completely empowered in that health check, because I can say what I want to who I want to, and I've got the politics sorted out. It's not going to be a problem. And I do it pretty carefully. You have to be careful about how you deliver the message, but it's actually partly to do with just that initial conversation. And then the first things I look for are, what's the level of confidence in the program? So how many people are the original people that were assigned to the steering group still going, or have they delegated? When I sit down with stakeholders, how do they feel about the program? Because if they're lacking confidence in it, they will want to distance themselves from it. They don't want to be associated with a failing project. So confidence is absolutely key, and momentum comes from that. And if you've got the opposite and people have bought into your program at the various different levels in the organization, they will be attracted to it. They'll push resources into it, and they will help you deliver it because they want to be associated with the successful program. So in fact, this is going to be no surprise to anyone listening to this from a PMO background, but therefore the most important phase in a transformation program, and the most important thing that the PMO can do for that transformation program, is generate that confidence and momentum through the definition and mobilization phase, that first phase of definition and mobilization. It's not just about business analysts going around and collecting requirements. It's about building confidence and momentum in the key stakeholder group and across the organization, getting the right level of championing, not allowing 14 people to be assigned to the steering group. That's not a steering group. So it's those sorts of things that, I think really make a difference if you can get that simple stuff right. It feels a bit patronizing to say simple. It is not simple to define and mobilize a program. It really isn't. But if you keep what you're trying to achieve simple and don't focus on all those different roles, we need to have 5 change managers, 3 business analysts, 2 architects, 4 project managers, or whatever. They're irrelevant until you've got your definition and mobilization sorted and you know what you're trying to deliver and when you're going to deliver it. The people and the roles and the titles that go with PMOs they're not relevant.
Yeah, I agree with that. Simple is not easy. Val and I, when we worked together, we saw this a lot where, you'd go through either, a mini reforecast or even a total program rebaseline, and you do sort of everything bottoms up, all your 3-point estimate, all the good stuff that the book tells you, right? And you actually get the buy-in with the processes and all of that from the engineers all the way through to those delivering on site. And all for it to come to a project manager or project director who says those dates don't work, and so move it back in, becomes
Yeah.
academic, and guess what? No one buys into the program anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because you've just taken all of that away. I don't own any of this any longer because this date was made up in an ivory tower
Yeah.
and I don't recognize it. And so you just lose all that confidence in the program. And so no one follows it in the end.
Yeah.
And this is where I want to actually ask you, because to peel back the layers on pragmatism,
Yeah.
have you got examples in your illustrious career where someone's come to you with a book and you've actually just thrown the book out, and what the results were and how you did that?
Yeah, I mean, we've never really been great users of the book, to be honest. But I mean, I'll give you an example. So I went into a university about some years ago, and they told me they had this was within the PMO. They told me they were very excited about their 10-year strategy and implement and plan for the university. And I said, okay. And the person in the PMO said, why do you come to our war room? By the way, I never quite understand why we call these rooms war rooms when the last thing we want is conflict, and it's all about collaboration. But there we go. So I went to her war room, and up on the these posters of the program, and she said, so what do you think? And I said, well, all I can see at the moment is strategic goals. I can't see any shape to a program. I can't see a program structure. I can't see a set of deliverables. I can't see a plan. I can't see the structure. I can't see the governance structure. I can't see how all that's going to work. Anyway, so I worked with them for about 4 or 5 months, helping them do various different things. And I had to do a presentation to their council, which is the equivalent of a board of directors, the external board. And they said to me, you've been working with these guys for 6 months. You know all the executive team. Do you think we're going to be able to successfully, do you believe we're going to be able to deliver our strategy? And I said, no, I don't. And the reason I said, they said, well, why? And I said, because you've got some of the really basic, simple things wrong here. Your people are more than capable of delivering a transformation program. They're really good, high quality, excellent people. But you've got a 10-year plan. Well, base one, who in this room is still going to be here in 10 years' time? Base two, who can see beyond 12 to 18 months in terms of, how, if you're asked to look at a vision beyond 12 to 18 months, it's going to be hard to engage with it because no one's really thinking about what they're going to be doing in 2 weeks' time, let alone 12 to 18 months. So I said, what I said is you need to phase your program back into phases so that you can say it is a 10-year program, but phase one is a 12-month phase. And this is how the world is going to change for students and for staff in our university in 12 months' time. And when we get there, we'll be then going through to the next 12 months and then the next 12 months. And no doubt during that 10-year period, the world will change. And so you'll have to adapt your strategy. So, but this was the sort of thing that for me, that sort of thing really should be coming from a portfolio level PMO. It should be challenging how we are putting together a 10-year strategy and yet we're not presenting it in a way that anyone can really engage with to generate confidence and momentum into the plan. And therefore, I remember going around speaking to people and saying, so what do you feel has been delivered so far? And that all they'd ever seen was a booklet that said the 10-year strategy. They'd never seen anything. Nothing had changed in their world at all. So, yeah, I mean, in that situation, we did throw out the book and we just said, look, forget all of that for the moment. Let's just work on the absolute simple fundamentals. Who in the university is in a position to sponsor this program of activity? Who is the best person to do that? Forget about whether they know about programs. Where are their relationships? Where's their credibility, etc.? And that's what we did. And we then helped them build that program, which is now on its way. I mean, it's still got challenges, but it is at least more pragmatic. It's more practical. It's more manageable. It's more understandable. And people have therefore got their heads around what they're trying to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months of
No, absolutely. It
10-year
reminds
plan.
me, I think Val and I used to say again, you know, you can have the best project schedule in Primavera that passes all the health checks and, you know,
Yeah.
does fully logic linked and it's amazing. But if no one believes in it, then there's no point. You know, if you write the project plan on the back of a fag pack and everyone believes in it, you have a better chance of actually delivering it. But I've got one more, Rupert, before I hand
Yeah.
back to Val. You spoke earlier a little bit around where you had to, you know, every 6 months you have to sort of show value to get your next 6 months, right, as a consultant.
Yeah.
And if only in-house teams had to show the same value, how would, if someone's in an in-house team or leading an in-house team and listening to you, what
Yeah.
tips would you give them to show the value that they are providing to their organization, to their portfolio, to their program, to their project? What would you say to them that they should be
So
doing?
the first tip I would say to any PMO that's in that position is, I would say, go straight to the outcomes and work backwards. So what are the outcomes that the organization is trying to achieve? And so that's number one. Number two, I would really challenge yourself and the people around you in your PMO to map out what the culture of the organization is. What's the maturity? What's the level of capability? How do they think? How do they work? How do they operate, etc.? And I would work from the outcomes that's probably hopefully would be sitting in a business strategy, which would be probably saying, look, there are 5 pillars that we're trying to build within the organization. One of them is about revenue growth. One of them is about cost cutting. One of them is about whatever, regulatory and compliance. But understanding what those outcomes are, and then saying, right, if that's what the organization is trying to achieve, we are the professionals in portfolio management and project and program management. And we're working with an organization at this level of maturity, this level of capability, with this sort of culture. How do we then have the relevant governance frameworks in place to take the right decisions, choose the right projects to do to achieve the strategy? We have a concept of which is called start fit, stay fit. So when you actually launch a program, how do you make sure you start fit to succeed? And once it's been going for 3 to 6 months, how do you make sure you stay fit? And don't overcomplicate it. There is no need, in my opinion, to get a big 5 consultancy to come in and give you a health check that costs
Amen.
hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's just not necessary. Keep it simple, keep it practical, and work from outcomes back, so that when you do have documents and processes, etc., they are aligned with the organization and what it's trying to achieve. They're not aligned with the latest course you've been on that's told you about this fantastic new tool. And I say that about our own tool. I quite openly say, if our tool is not right for a client to use, our PPM tool, then don't use it. I would completely respect that. It needs to be the right sort of tool for your organization, with your culture, your level of maturity, etc. So I would, for base one, work from the outcomes backwards and keep it simple. Just keep it as simple. The more simple it is, the more chance you have of succeeding. It's really not much more complicated than that.
You make it sound so easy, Rupert, and I'm sure. But you're right. There's a fundamental law of almost like reductionism, and if you can think with the end state in mind, I think that's almost what a good, at least an external consultant would do. They would start with, okay, where are you heading or trying to head? And in 10 years is far too long. 5 years is probably too long. Especially since COVID, I think we can all respect the fact that we don't know what's happening around the corner. and that it's almost at almost a level of practicality and realistic kind of expectations that things can go completely the other way and we not expect it, and have a massive impact on projects. But I like the idea of outcome focused. I'm working with a client at the moment, and the same thing, going back to fundamentals, is do we have a plan? What is in that plan? What is required for the business for us to get to the next gate? And lo and behold, whilst everyone was busy working and doing a great job in their own fields, no one had really brought it all together. So when people left the business or the project and new people came in, they had no idea. There was no wayfinding, no signs to say, look here first and then read this and do that. So the whole element of not expecting people to leave and new people to come in was left out of the calculation for how projects work. And we all know that people don't stay on projects for 15 years. They move around, and I certainly have, and I'm sure you guys have as well. So it's a very interesting one. But I want to get back to you had a conversation about these resources, or I think Dale did, about the individual roles themselves. Have we reduced them down too much? And I happen to agree. Like and you've obviously been in this field a lot longer, but the role itself has diluted into these single roles, and arguably, back when I started project controls, planning was part of that. So was risk, so was doc management, so was governance. It all kind of was one role. Now, it doesn't mean that you were just, a generalist, but you kind of had a specialist in that area, but you understood, or at least appreciated, all the other elements of that. And it wasn't necessarily a one-for-one, or wasn't man on man, if we're going to be talking about sports again. One of the challenges I think we have is that when you're building out a PMO from scratch, that seems to be the norm, is to go to, the book or a framework and to say, well, I need X amount of risk managers, and I need X amount of planners, and I need X amount of cost engineers, whatever it's going to be. And we're seeing what I would say a fixed organizational design that's procuring people to be bums on seats, not necessarily that valuable. And I think it does two things. One, it causes the project to cost overrun significantly. Two, it squeezes out smaller projects to get talent, because obviously all the big projects clean up and they ask for 50 to 100 to 1,000 planners. And maybe even the third thing, it creates automatic divide within the program. So my question is to you, maybe what is the best way, what are the pillars of setting up a PMO effectively with that in mind of organizational design?
So I think that the key for me is who and what you recruit into lead the PMO. And what I mean by that is, if you get your leadership piece right, then the rest will flow. Now, one thing that I do, right or wrong, is I tend to, I work with a combination of people, or a combination of people work for us successfully as PMO leads. And they tend to fall into two camps. One is that the PMO leads are people who have a lot of experience, and they know, they're pragmatic, they're practical, they know how to cut through that stuff and say, do we really need all these roles when what we're trying to achieve is X, Y, or Z? The other is that I would say probably 70% of the people I have leading PMOs are not pure thoroughbred PMO people. They are a mix. They come from a background of PMO and delivery. There are many people out there who have been in delivery roles, project managers, program managers, who have got and become very passionate about PMO as a function. And in many ways, they're the best sort of people you can get, to lead those CPMOs, EPMOs, etc., because they've sat on both sides of the fence, and so they know what level of planning you need in order to have a sort of pragmatic set of outputs. The other thing is, they will generally know that if you have in most organizations, portfolio is tiered into three, typically, you know this, but three tiers. You've got tier one programs. There's not many of them, but they're very big. And you don't do many in a year in any organization. There's more tier 2 programs, and that's a combination of sort of large projects and programs, but they're in the second tier. And then in the third tier, you've got BAU activities and more sort of BAU type projects. And even in the tier 1 programs, and certainly in the tier 2 programs, if they've got work streams or they are genuine programs with multiple projects, it's going to be almost impossible to think about employing sort of project managers to run every single work stream. It just doesn't work that way. Normally you get subject matter experts in a certain part of the business who are then assigned to lead a work stream. So you automatically have this mix of people who come from a professional project and program background and PMO background with people that are normal operational people who are driving and leading key work streams. And I think that's when it really helps to have that combination of PMO expertise and delivery expertise in the PMO lead role, because they know they've just got that experience of what's the right level of planning, what's the right level. The other thing I'd say is, in our own PPM tool, like most, obviously, we have a planning tool. There is a planning module. But what I know is that probably about 20% of projects actually end up with a detailed project plan. Not many people really properly use Microsoft Project. Some people do, but not many people really properly use it. And then probably about 50% of those 20% build it in the first place and don't maintain it. So, it's a sort of artifact that's used, which is really useful at the front end of the project, but it's not really maintained. So you've then got 60-70% of people running activities without those plans. And, so you need someone, I think, at the top of the program or the PMO who knows how to operate at a level which is practical but valuable, as opposed to trying to force a way of doing things that doesn't match the world they come from. And therefore it fails and it falls over. And generally, I suppose my view is that at the end of the day, a bit like my career, as I say, I've never been on a Prince 2 course, and I'm probably sounding very much like that. But projects at the end of the day, I sometimes say to people, so who in the room thinks they would make a good project manager? And very few people put their hands up. And yet we all run projects all of the time, whether it's going on holiday, building a house, whatever it might be. All of us do. It's just natural part of our the way we operate as human beings. And I think, it's not that complicated. You're trying to get from A to B in a project or a program, going through various different steps. And on that route, you've got milestones to deliver, you've got tasks to manage, etc. How you actually do that doesn't matter as long as it happens and it happens successfully. And it's much more likely to work if you adapt that approach to the way that your organization is set up culturally and the characteristics of your organization. If you go into a firm of lawyers and you try and get all the lawyers who are heading up different parts of the law practice, and I know this because I've done it, to fill in project plans because you want a master plan, it just isn't going to happen.
Rupert, if I just jump in there, something, I don't know if you know Professor Eddie Obeng. We've had him on the podcast a few times, and he was saying that, if the project is too simple or too easy, right, it's not glamorous. You don't get promotions from it because you've delivered it without any fuss. And so inherently, project managers or project professionals potentially go and look for complex troubleshooting scenarios where they can shine. And so do we go look for problems? Are we going to look for problems that don't exist on projects? Is that the case? Is that what you're alluding to? Because you're saying, let's just simplify down because they're not as complex as we think they are. And so the human being, the natural state is, well, actually, I need to add value to this, and the way I add value is by fixing things. But if it's not broken, then we don't need to fix it, right?
I think the complexity is actually in the making a program simple. The complexity is in the simplicity.
Okay.
So the bit that's tricky is, how do you make it simple enough? You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of flagship programs that people love to run because it gives them a high profile. Well, that's fair enough. And actually, that is life. And a lot of programs are high profile, and quite rightly too. And if you do a good job of delivering a high profile program, it's good for your career. And again, quite rightly too. It's got presumably very high benefits to the organization. So, but I think what I'm saying is, so I probably should restate what I'm not saying projects and programs are really easy to deliver. They're not. But I think we do overcomplicate sometimes the way that we approach programs. Right. It is, the things for me that are difficult are more the intangible soft elements of a program. It's the politics. It's conflicts between departments that need to be working together. It's stuff that doesn't sit on a project plan. It sits potentially in a work stream, a comms work stream, an engagement work stream. But it's those sorts of elements that make, for me, programs complicated. It's the length of a program makes it complicated, because that very reason that university had, they've got them all. They've got a very long program. The university is full of politics. The academic community don't like change. They are professors. They're top of their game. They want to do what they've always done. So that's the complexity of the program. It's much more in the soft issues around the program than it is in the project plan or the technical solution or the whatever. That's relatively straightforward. But dealing with those issues, the politics, etc., I don't think it's something that's very easy to learn from the book. It's a real skill. It's just, and sometimes, people often say to me, and I really understand this, they say, why does it take an external consultant like you to come in and tell us what everyone already knows? Because that's life. That's just the way it works. There's no logic to it. It's not right, but it's how it is. So, it's time to use that to your advantage. And it's just one of those silly things. I don't know. Why is it that when a Big Five consultancy has their brand stamped on the front of a document, somehow it's read and it's listened to? Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. They're good points then, Rupert. I mean, I think we've all experienced that as well. As like, why? I mean, I've had many instances where I've come in and been part of that support, and perhaps it's an assessment, like you said, for PMO, and they said,
"Yeah,
so what, Val? We already knew this."
Yeah,
that's great. Well, we're a lot ahead of where we need to be. That means that executing this should be very, very easy. And we'll say it in front of the exec, and everyone goes quiet again. But going back to your point around just the I guess the complexity or even the complications, I think they're human nature. I mean, even planning a holiday can be absolutely complicated, and you've over-engineered it because you've decided to do 50 things in a week, but really what you wanted to do was relax on the beach. But you've decided to do activity one here, this is me, right? And then all of a sudden you've run out of relaxation time, so you need a holiday for a holiday. How many times have we heard that? I do think as well, one specific challenge, and I'm probably calling out a particular role type, is the plan. And I think you mentioned something about, the best part for PMO to really shape the project is at the start. Developing at the start gives us massive advantage to plan properly, set things in place properly, design an organization that works in terms of flow rather than hierarchical. I mean, I think we all agree that the top-down approach to organizational design actually does anyone no favors. The way projects are delivered should be in I guess in virtue of how we're going to deliver it to the customer or to the community. it should be delivered horizontally. So we do know that because we do have the integrated product team versus the cross product team. We know that we want a matrix organization. So we do understand that, but when it comes to executing that, we tend to get lost. So I guess the bit for me that's very tricky, and it comes back to politics, because I think that's what you were talking about as well. To avoid the politics, one of the challenges we have is contract to plan. So the contract structuring that we have for some of these big projects, and I work in probably the more mega projects. So the little projects don't get me excited anymore, Rupert. I need something bigger. I need a bigger hit. And my tolerance is building up, so I need that extra kind of, this isn't hard enough, but when it comes to contracts, it gets really, really tricky, because sometimes the contracts in themselves make it very difficult for us as a PMO or a PMO to execute the plan correctly. How do you get around that? So let's say there's some people listening, Rupert, and they've got a contract structure that's not necessarily built to the best way to deliver the outcomes, which is obviously frustrating for PMO. But how do they get around that? How do they work with the contract teams and the commercial teams?
It's a really tricky one, because we've been in that situation too. And so look, my view is PMOs, if they're really going to add value, there are times when you have to be seriously brave. And, you have to say, we are, we're the PMO, we are the professionals within the organization. This is a program that's got all sorts of complications, and particularly the contract landscape around this program is causing it to be extremely difficult, nigh on impossible. That is a time when I think the PMO needs to be calling that out as a real point of failure. And it's so important. It's such a car crash unless it gets sorted. And that is where you need to have the right sponsor to work with, to say, this is not something that I can resolve on my own within the PMO. This is something that is that serious to the organization and needs to be resolved, and it needs your leadership to resolve it, to help resolve it. Now, I go back to the definition phase of a program. Something that drives me absolutely nuts is that large transformation programs, the executive sponsor of a large transformation program, 9 times out of 10 is chosen because he or she is sitting in the functional seat that is the recipient of the output, the outcome of that program. And I think that's just so the wrong way to go about it. Your sponsor needs to be chosen based on who is in the best position to sponsor the program when the program has the challenges that always happen on major programs. So that means they've got to be the person that's got the credibility, that's got the relationships, that's got the ability to challenge where challenge needs to be challenged, needs to be enforced. And it's really, at that point of program definition, you just don't allow the wrong sponsor to be put in place. You never allow 2 sponsors to be put in place. That's an absolute disaster. But you do make sure that the person that's put in charge or sponsoring that program is someone who, and particularly on a program that's got commercial sensitivities like contracts, is someone that's going to be able to stand up to those issues when they happen, and if they happen, and help the organization resolve them. And frankly, if you don't have a sponsor that is at that level, this is where you've got to be brave. You might have to be going to the investment committee saying, we should not be doing this program. This is not a program. Now, that is very easy to say. And it's extremely hard for someone who's running a PMO to go to the investment committee, which is probably chaired by the CFO or the CEO or the COO, and say, this is not a program that we should be doing, because they'll, the answer's normally the same.
Yeah, well, exactly. And especially if there is a client involved and the revenue we make from projects is huge, right? From a tier one perspective, you're basically saying it can't be done, or if it is going to be done, it's going to cost a lot more than we expect, and that makes it very difficult.
I think so, and I think companies shouldn't shoot the messenger, and if the messenger is the PMO in that scenario, it is wrong to shoot them, but they do. The reason that sponsor is so important is because an organization where there's lots of contracts, there should be there'll be a commercial director or a chief commercial officer or whatever, who is, so you'll have a chief commercial officer, they should have a CFO, and there should be an executive sponsor of the program. And the executive sponsor of the program should be in a position to trot along the corridor to the chief commercial officer and to the CFO saying, this is a car crash and it needs, we need to sort this out. And it's not really for the PMO to fight those battles. You need a really good quality, high level executive sponsor with the right credibility and relationships to fight those battles.
Unfortunately, we do end up in those spots a lot of the time. And one of the things I've learned, because I've been burned a few times, is to make sure you've got a coalition and alliance, at least at that C-suite level, at that VP level, to help you articulate the message properly. I mean, it will go back to Dale and I were on a program where we wanted to stop the program. We didn't want to report for months and months. We said we need 1 to 2 months to just get our shit together. Give us the time to do this properly. Because otherwise what ends up happening is, as you know, momentum can be a good thing, but it can also be a negative thing because it compounds errors. So if you know there's a problem, we did as you said, be brave and step up and step out and say something about it and say what you need to do to achieve, to get it back on track, which is apt because it was a rail program. So to get it back on track, we said we needed some time to pause, reflect, and then get the teams lined up so that the organization could deliver, which was, blatantly refused. And it was a stupid idea, apparently, because, what would PMO know? But it also, the complications of some of these projects, we've seen the schedules themselves. So if they're not agile, Rupert, they are, they use their waterfall or the critical path method. They are looking for, these programs could be 5 to 10 years long, but they want activities down to the 10th year. And you're talking about tens of thousands of activities logically linked in a program. And there's something around a fixed program of work to an organizational, ratio of planners. So I've seen programs as they scale, they say, well, we need a planner for every X amount of sections, right, of the plan.
Yeah.
And you go from 5, 10, 20, 50, 100. There's a project in Australia, which is, significant, of 50 plus billion, 300 people in PMO. And you get to a point and you come in and you say, you've got too many people. And they said, oh, we know, but we've got a lot of reporting requirements and we've got contractors and we've got this and we've got that. So there is this kind of tricky bit around how do we unstick that? How do we untangle the element of, man placing across, or women placing, if you like, across the program because of the size of the program that we created, which isn't really pragmatic or useful.
Whoa. I mean, that's a different scale.
That's just one.
300. I mean,
300
oh my
plus.
God.
I think they had about 20 people in risk. I was like, really?
I just don't know how you fix that problem. I really don't. I mean, my pragmatic self would say, if all 300 of you walk out of the door tomorrow and go and do something else, what happens? What's the impact on? I mean, obviously the program stops; it's not going to move forwards. But I'm struggling to get my head around that. I mean, 300. That's just enormous.
Oh yeah. And this is a common occurrence in Australia as well. It's not not that big, obviously, but it's the same process.
It happens, and you know what it is? There's two key things, right? One, you'll find in these large organizations, right, that deliver multiple projects and programs across the portfolio. Every project manager wants their own planner. And the argument is, I want that person. And then I want my project controller, I want my cost manager, et cetera, et cetera. I want my risk manager. And, you go, well, but you don't need it. And they go, well, I've budgeted for it, so I want
So,
it. And so you lose the argument, because they feel a sense of ownership over, it's my project planner, it's my budget, and if you don't support them as a PMO, then they'll just get their own in anyway. And so it's the politics again, I think, Rupert, of how
yeah,
how you right size a PMO
it's
amongst all of
interesting.
that.
My world over the last 30 years has probably not, we've probably been involved in programs in private enterprise and public sector, which are up to 100, maybe 150 million. So just nowhere near that scale. And the vast majority of them are probably between 5 and 50 million. So you are in the realms of, I want a planner in my work stream. And, we are, my view on that is, the problem is that you then end up with a planner in every work stream, which overcomplicates the plan, and also and just delays generating an outcome or an output that is of any real value, because then it becomes quite hard to stitch them all together, and the whole process just becomes an issue. Multiply that by 100, and
Yeah.
I can't get my head around 300 people in the PMO. It's
Look,
huge.
and I'm very judgmental. So, it's easy to do when you're outside looking in, and you say 300, but for them, it's probably justified. So you almost live in this delusional space. And once it becomes the norm, it's the practice. So then someone leaves and it's replaced, it's not improved. And I guess the lead on question to that is, how do you feel about AI? So obviously AI has been a big conversation in the last couple of years, and probably accelerated by a lot of hyperbole. And there are some practical applications that Dale and I know. We are, I guess, advocates of anything that makes projects a bit more streamlined, a bit simplified, a bit more pragmatic, perhaps, if it could do that. One of the things I think it could do is reduce some of these over-engineering pieces, like planning programs to the nth degree, or at least alleviate some of the transactional work that a lot of these people are doing, so it enhances people's roles rather than takes them away, which we've been a big advocate for too. But have you seen how AI would affect PMO, and is that swimming against the tide as well?
So I think it's probably swimming with a tidal wave, which is on its way. I'm not sure it's swimming against the tide. I think, funny enough, weirdly enough, I was in my car the other day. A couple of days ago, I went to a Peter Gabriel concert. You probably don't remember Peter Gabriel, but it was absolutely brilliant. And I was thinking the next morning about how technology is driving PMOs, projects, programs, portfolios. And I was more specifically thinking, how in my software business with our PPM software is there a way we can use AI to enhance the value that our software is generating? And I think it would be through essentially automating a lot of the transactional stuff that happens on programs and projects. And the sort of attraction to me was partly a sort of a defensive position, thinking if I don't adopt some level of AI within our software package, we're just going to be left completely behind, on the basis that, if you haven't got AI, you're basically a dinosaur type product. So I think it will impact. I think it will impact some of the functional and transactional activities that happen across a portfolio office over time. I'm not quite sure when. I can't get my head around the pace at which this is happening, and which is likely to actually hit the market. But what I don't think it'll do, I don't think it will resolve those core issues that I was talking about earlier on, to do with confidence and momentum and politics and conflicts, and because they're just so emotional and emotive. And I think it's going to be if it does, address any of those sorts of issues, I think that's a long way off.
Yeah, I think the way I saw it was we actually had this chat with Dan Patterson, Dale, remember, and we said maybe it's about being prompted ourselves. So the prompt prompts us in a way that, if the medium was a chat GPT type function, that it helped us ask good questions when we need to ask them. So if you were looking for inputs at the start, it would kind of know what would be needed by a PMO and how to articulate that, and then assemble it in the background with some type of AI agent, so that, you develop a project management plan, you develop an org chart that's in line with the project objectives, the outcomes are there. It automatically knows roughly what the risks would be as an inherent kind of starter, kind of kickstarts the project perhaps as a mobilizer tool.
I think if it was able to align with the politics and the culture of organizations, and therefore help to define a program within an organization that was kind of fit for that organization specifically. Taking, my example, so a law practice is just so different. A legal practice is so different. Running transformation programs in a legal practice is like a different world to running a transformation program in Vodafone or in British Gas. British Gas is a really sort of slightly older culture. They've been around a long time, etc. Vodafone's was always a very highly commercial, fast-moving, cut corners, but do things really exciting stuff. And legal practices, you got 200 legal partners, law partners within the law firm who they're paid bonuses based on the cash at the end of the year that's available at the end of the year. So any money that's spent on a project is they see as taking away from their bonus. If you're spending £1 million on a project, that's coming out of their bonus pot. So, and you've got to bring them all with you. The chief executive doesn't work that way in a law practice. So if it can align with the culture and the organization that's in play, it's probably got a big role to play, and maybe bigger than certainly than I can think about or imagine. It's just quite scary to think that it's just extraordinary, isn't it? It's just bizarre.
It really is. It's and having delved into it a bit about possibilities, and then the application actually being better than you in some regard, right? The idea that some of the things that we do that makes us human, that makes us kind of live on projects and work on projects, could be made obsolete because AI decides there's a better way to do it, and you're like, oh shit, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Because innovation in itself is like, you hear something being innovative and you're like, oh, that's so, the iPod, the iPhone, that's so simple. Of course, that makes sense. No buttons. But it is at the granular level. I think it does go against the grain a little bit, because I think to some degree some of the big projects which are government funded are about generating work, generating jobs, securing the economy. There is a kind of a geopolitical reason why we build projects and invest in construction infrastructure, not just because we want to, generate revenue and benefits. It's actually part of our societal fabric, which I don't think AI would understand. But so if they say, well, you don't need 300 people, which we know is a bit different, there's a bit high number, but they say you need 5, would that be acceptable? It probably wouldn't be. The contractor probably doesn't make enough revenue out of that. And maybe there's a perception from the client that the value isn't there. So there's still that we're a long way from having AI replace anything to that degree. But I do see a very scary thing that I'll leave you with before so you don't sleep tonight, Rupert, is that the ability for AI to write code and to improve on itself is a pretty scary idea. And I was listening to it the other day. There's this podcast about it, and the guy was saying some pretty scary stuff. He says we've already broken the cardinal rules. We said to ourselves we wouldn't let AI onto the internet, and we did. We said to ourselves we wouldn't monetize AI, and we did. And then we said to ourselves we wouldn't teach AI code, and we did. So the next 5 years will be very interesting, and I think that's a grave understanding of how innovative and creative AI will get to a point, but it does give you a bit of a horizon of concern, because you're like, well, holy crap, now that's that's true. If it does decide to do something.
I mean, as quite an old man, not that old, but quite
You're
old.
doing all right. You're doing all right.
I mean, let's just put that in perspective. When I first turned up at my first job, the computers had those the typewriters were those golf ball typewriters. No one had a word processor. No one. Didn't exist. There was no web. There was no email. There was nothing like that. There was no mobile phone. It was all done by letters on these original sort of typewriters. That's when I started work. What is frightening is how much things have changed in 40 years, but it's the exponential ramp of pace of change that, we're talking about AI and what it can do and what it's going to be able to do at such pace. I feel quite lucky in many ways that I've had a full career without interruption, and I am coming to the end of that career where I can go and watch a lot more cricket, play a lot more golf, and do all that sort of stuff, whilst everyone else is dealing with the complexities and also the very exciting opportunities that AI no doubt presents. It is extraordinary. It's just extraordinary what the possibilities are, and it's almost not possible to imagine what those opportunities are without being wrong, without underplaying it. It's fascinating.
Yeah. What a fascinating way to head towards the end of the podcast, because also not just about AI, but I'm hugely surprised, Rupert, that you brought up cricket with an Australian on the podcast.
I was going to say, I went to the theatre about 6 months ago, and I watched Jonathan Agnew from Test Match Special with Glenn McGrath, and he said, "What's the score going to be in the Ashes?" And Glenn McGrath said 5-0. I'm just interested. No particular reason, but I'm interested, Val, in what you think the score in the Ashes is going to be.
I'm not going to comment because I've got English blood, you see. So
good.
So, my mother's English, and not that she's into cricket, but the family. There's one side of the family that would be, if I put it down and recorded it, they'd just keep replaying it. If I was wrong or right. And part of me likes an underdog, so we'll see what happens. But
you know what? I watched the Test match the other day, and like many people, probably on both sides, we were all glued to the television or the radio in the last sort of few hours of the Test match. It was such an exciting, good, entertaining watch. I honestly, for the first time in my life, I genuinely thought, do you know what? Australia really deserved to win that. They really, really deserved to win it. They dug it out, they got there, and it was brilliant. It was just such good entertainment. And actually, that for me is just everything. It's brilliant. It was superb.
Yeah.
It will be 3-2 to England.
3-2 to England. We'll see. Australia's doing all right so far. We'll see what happens. But also, we've got the Australian All Black game happening, I think, soon as well in Melbourne. I'm trying to get tickets for that. So that's fantastic. That's going to be amazing. And the Springboks playing. Where are they playing? I
think we've got Argentina.
Argentina. They're looking pretty good these days.
Yeah, we've got the All Blacks at Twickenham just before the World Cup. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah.
But as a South African, Rupert, some cricketing advice for the English. Check the Aussies' pockets during the game. Might find a bit of, yellow.
A bit of sand.
Don't touch your pockets.
But look, we've had so much fun on the podcast, Rupert. I hope you have as well.
It's been brilliant. Thank you.
It's been a long time in the making, as we said, but I'm so pleased we finally managed to get you on the podcast. Before we let you go, are there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think if I was to leave any final thought, it would be keep things simple. you be the professionals, be brave, and you go and tell your organization what they need to be doing in order to deliver your portfolio successfully. And I'm sure, like me, you will continue to love the PMO space. It's a brilliant space.
Wow, well said. Keep it simple and be brave. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, I loved it. Thank you, Rupert, for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have to do a part 2 where we can go really deep into like the future. Although you are getting to the twilight of your career, I think for people coming in, I mean, it's a whole new wave of things to think about and consider.
Yeah.
But thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you guys inviting me on. Thank you.
No, thank you. The pleasure and privilege is ours. So there you have it, folks. That is all the time we have for this episode. But remember, before you go, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Rupert Taylor, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.
Thank you.